This case takes place in the USA in the year 1990. When planning a major crime, criminals often use disguises to conceal their identity. True crime history is filled with inventive approaches. Some stretch tights over their heads, distorting facial features but still allowing visibility. In cases like the Unabomber or the Zodiac Killer, a simple hoodie paired with glasses or a mask sufficed. However, a few criminals take a disturbing turn, dressing up as characters known for bringing joy to children. Much like John Wayne Gacy, today's case involves another killer clown. Marlene Mae McKinnon Warren was born on the 15th of April 1950 in Mount Clemens, Michigan. Marlene was the middle child growing up alongside her two sisters, Leanne and Debbie. Her father was a military man and a World War II veteran, and her mother Shirley was a military wife. Marlene and her sisters enjoyed a peaceful and joyful childhood, typical of a Midwestern girl, often spending time on their grandfather's farm gardening and painting. An intriguing detail about Marlene was her passion for painting, but in particular, clown portraits. These paintings reflected her talent as an artist and her fondness of clowns. Over the years, she created a large collection, which her mother displayed throughout her home. When Marlene and her sisters were still young, their parents divorced. Their father, who was called Leonard, moved on, and the girls were raised by their mother and her new partner. When Marlene was 15, her family were preparing to move to Germany. However, she was unable to join them, as she had met a man and became pregnant. By the age of 18, Marlene had married her childhood sweetheart and given birth to two sons, John and Joseph. Marlene became a caring and devoted mother, although her role as a caregiver intensified when she was made a single parent at just 20 years old. Shortly after the breakup, Marlene met an 18-year-old man named Michael. By 1972, the two were married, creating a new chapter in her life. The two moved to Florida and became incredibly business savvy. Marlene had worked in real estate, and soon enough she ventured into buying and managing properties of her own. Over time, they accumulated over 20 properties in the area, with Marlene handling much of the business operations. As their wealth grew, Michael launched a car repossession, rental and sales dealership with Bargain Motors. This business was opened in Marlene's name. Bargain Motors was making the family money, but it developed a reputation for being a questionable business. On the property side of things, Marlene had built a successful business, helping her clients and often compromising on payments with tenants who struggled financially. She was focused on doing things right and being kind. Michael, on the other hand, was running a shady business at Bargain Motors, and he engaged in a number of fraudulent schemes. When it came to business, Michael could be incredibly ruthless. Needless to say, the family was doing incredibly well. With their combined income, the family moved to an exclusive aero club community in Wellington, Palm Beach County. This high-end neighborhood featured homes with access to an airfield, as many residents had private planes. Michael embraced the luxury lifestyle, buying his own airplane and a racehorse. Shortly after moving to this area, Michael and Marlene's marriage hit trouble, and things only worsened after Marlene's son tragically passed away in a car accident. He was only 22 years old at the time. This of course had an immense impact on the family, as anyone could imagine. Marlene tried to keep going for the sake of her other son Joseph, but her relationship with Michael deteriorated. According to Joseph, Michael became emotionally distant and was rarely even around. Marlene not only had to cope with the devastating loss of her eldest son, but she also grew increasingly suspicious of Michael. She began to suspect that he was having an affair. Another fear began to loom over her. She was convinced that if anything ever happened to her, Michael would be the reason. According to reports, Michael sat down with his lawyer and Marlene, and during this meeting, Michael asked a chilling question. He said, if a man were to murder his wife, what would happen to their estate? Whether he was joking or testing Marlene's reaction, the remark only fueled her growing fears that Michael might one day harm her. The relationship continued to deteriorate so severely that Marlene felt that she had to confide in her mother and son about this fear. Marlene said that if anything were to happen to her, Michael is to blame. Joseph's response was, "No way my dad would ever do that." Marlene replied, "Don't put it past him." Perhaps Marlene saw the looming divorce, and, knowing Michael's illegal schemes, she maybe believed that he would stop at nothing to secure their shared wealth. Whatever the case, it speaks volumes about the state of their love. Now, what is known is that Michael had in fact started an affair with another woman around this time, a woman named Sheila Klein. Sheila Klein was no ordinary woman. Physically, she was striking. She was tall, with long, shiny brown hair and sharp features. She was known to be strong-willed and independent. Sheila certainly wasn't afraid to go after what she wanted. Her early adult years were marked by brushes with the law. In 1984, she was arrested for shoplifting in Palm Beach County. 2 years later, in 1986, she faced a felony theft charge and received 6 months of probation. She was a determined woman who got what she wanted, whether that meant breaking the law. Shortly after her run-ins with the law in August of 1986, she married a man named Richard C. Keene at the age of 23. Richard was 41, nearly twice her age, and by 1990, Sheila and Richard were both working for Michael at Bargain Motors. Sheila's fearlessness earned her a tough reputation, as described by her other co-workers. In interviews, they commented on her tomboyish figure. Sheila dressed in a manly fashion, often wearing combat boots and carrying a gun. She and Richard worked in the repossession department at Bargain Motors, and she wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. Repossessing cars meant facing dangerous situations. She had to enter private properties, confront angry owners, and be prepared at all times for violence. Sheila always carried a gun for her own protection, saying, "People are crazy, they'll come out with shotguns." Sheila wasn't at Bargain Motors for long before she and her husband started having relationship issues. Unfortunately, at the age of 26, Sheila was forced to file a domestic violence complaint against her husband. Following this complaint being made, the two parted ways. However, throughout this turbulent time, Michael Warren became her shoulder to cry on. According to his employees, he could turn on this exceptionally empathetic and caring side. Perhaps it was genuine, or perhaps he was playing a role to get exactly what he wanted. Sheila moved out of her marital home to her own apartment with her son. According to some sources, this was paid for by Michael. While Marlene was at home trying to keep her family together in the wake of her son's death, Michael was seen at Sheila's apartment on a regular basis. So often, in fact, that her neighbours assumed that Michael was her husband. The affair was far from a well-kept secret. At Bargain Motors, it was an open secret amongst employees, many of whom were very well aware of the relationship. Apparently, the way Sheila looked at Michael was enough evidence for some. She was smitten. Many of the employees believed that Michael was only in it for the physical relationship, but Sheila's behaviour became more and more possessive over time. Sheila was deeply in love with Michael, and by April of 1990, her feelings were hard to hide. During an event, tensions began to surface. Sheila grew frustrated when she couldn't sit next to Michael. Michael's mother was also in attendance at this event. She had noticed her strange behaviour and confronted her, reminding Sheila that Michael had a wife. Michael's mother then asked Sheila if she was in love with her son. Sheila didn't hold back. She admitted, "Yes, I am." Michael's mother then asked Michael, "Are you in love with Sheila too?" His response was as self-centered as it was dismissive. He just replied, "I love myself." Sheila was done keeping this a secret. She wanted to be with Michael fully. While Michael was not ready to leave his wife Marlene, he seemed equally disinterested in continuing the marriage. So, was Michael going to divorce Marlene and split the wealth they had both accumulated, or would he take action? The details of this case remain contested even to this day, but the following account is based on the prosecution's arguments and the evidence provided in the court, which were then upheld by the outcome of the trial. The case reached its peak when Sheila grew impatient and started plotting how to finally get what she wanted more than anything, Michael. But there was one obstacle in her way, Marlene Warren. On the evening of the 24th of May 1990, Sheila rushed to a costume store, ready to put her plan into action. In this costume store that day was a woman named Deborah. Deborah was an employee working the late shift and was preparing to close up. She recalled the moment vividly in later interviews. A tall woman with long, chocolate brown hair, brown eyes, and a masculine demeanor walked into the shop and urgently said, "I need to buy a costume." Whether by chance or premeditation, Sheila chose a clown outfit, complete with accessories and an orange wig. She already had the motive, and she had a gun, and now she had the perfect disguise. All that was left was to assassinate Marlene without getting caught. Around this time, Sheila was accidentally given the perfect getaway vehicle. A couple had borrowed a rental car from a competitor to Bargain Cars, but they had accidentally returned the car to Bargain Cars. This was Sheila's chance. By using this car, she would be able to use it for the crime without it ever being officially linked to her. Once the job was done, she could abandon the vehicle, leaving no trace behind. It was a clever move that fit seamlessly into her plan to kill Marlene and avoid suspicion. On the 26th of May 1990, Sheila Keane woke up and decided that this day was the day. Her lover Michael Warren was heading to the Miami racetrack with a car full of friends, leaving his wife Marlene at home alone with her son Joseph and some of his friends. While Marlene prepared food for the boys, Sheila set out to finalize her sinister plan. In a disturbing twist, Sheila drove to a public supermarket to complete her look. Sheila thought to herself, what better way to deliver someone's death than with red and white carnation flowers and balloons? But not just any balloons. One balloon said, "You're the greatest." Witnesses later identified the customer as Sheila. She returned to the stolen car, now armed with flowers, balloons, and a deadly mission. She painted on a typical clown face paint covering, making sure to cover up her natural facial features, and then got into the clown costume, before making her way over to where Marlene lived. As she walked towards Marlene's front door, neighbours noticed the clown but thought nothing of it. Inside the house, Joseph and his friends spotted a colourful figure holding a silver balloon. When the doorbell rang, Marlene answered. She had always had a fondness for clowns, but little did she know the fate that awaited her the moment she opened that door. As the door opened, Marlene was given a moment to take in this bizarre but seemingly friendly situation. She looked at the clown, the flowers, and the balloons before saying the words, "How pretty." After a few tense seconds, Sheila slowly raised her arm. The cold steel of the revolver was gleaming in her grip. Once the gun was level with Marlene's head, Sheila pulled the trigger. The bullet entered Marlene's face a little above the lip at point-blank range. The boys inside the house couldn't see what had happened and thought the noise was the balloon popping. Marlene's son Joseph had a broken leg. He hobbled to the doorway with his leg in a cast. The last thing he was expecting was to find his mother lying on the floor with blood pooling from her head. Upon seeing this, he jumped towards the door and tried to chase Sheila. Sheila calmly walked down the path towards her car with no sense of urgency. Joseph and the boys then shouted at her, prompting her to turn around. As she turned, the boys caught a fleeting glimpse of Sheila's face. What they all remembered distinctly were the dark brown eyes piercing through the clown makeup, staring back at them with an unsettling intensity. The boys at the time thought the clown was a man, but how would one truly know? Sheila casually popped into the car, got into gear, and drove off down the street. The boys immediately called for the police and an ambulance. The paramedics rushed Marlene to the hospital for emergency surgery. Meanwhile, Sheila abandoned the car in a parking lot around halfway between Marlene's house and her own apartment. Marlene was still alive, but tragically, she never regained consciousness. 2 days after the shooting, her son John sat beside her in bed and vowed that he was going to find whoever did this to her. Marlene's life support was then switched off as the doctors explained that nothing could be done for her, and the police would soon begin their investigation. Based on the descriptions given by Joseph and his friends, the authorities initially suspected that the perpetrator was a male. Early on into the investigation, the police were informed about Marlene's growing concerns regarding her husband Michael. Both Joseph and Marlene's mother Shirley expressed their belief that Marlene feared that Michael might actually kill her. With this in mind, Michael was arrested as a prime suspect. However, it wasn't long before they discovered that Michael had a solid alibi, and he was soon released. He had been at the Miami track race with several witnesses at the time of the murder, leading the authorities to rule him out as a killer. And so, the police continued their investigation, which led them to search the business owned by the couple, Bargain Motors. Detectives began to question some of the employees who worked there, and this is when they came across a tip. One employee was adamant that they should investigate a fellow colleague named Sheila Keene. At first, the police were uncertain, as they were expecting a male. However, they soon learned of Michael and Sheila's affair, placing Sheila at the top of the suspect list. When police asked Sheila and Michael if they had an affair, they both denied it, but statements from the employees at Bargain Motors and the neighbours of Sheila proved otherwise. Which begs the question, why would they hide the truth? In a major breakthrough, detectives located the abandoned car matching the description of the getaway vehicle witnesses had seen. Inside the vehicle, they found orange synthetic fibres which matched the clown wig and brown human hair consistent with Sheila's. In response to this finding, detectives executed a search warrant at Sheila's home. There, they recovered orange fibres in her closet on her clothing that matched those found in the car. Further forensic examination of the hair recovered from the vehicle was compared to Sheila's. Although DNA testing was still in its infancy in the 1990s, the hair collected from the car was deemed a consistent match. The police now knew that they had their killer clown. However, the fibres and the hair weren't enough evidence to ensure a solid case to be put against Sheila. Despite overwhelming suspicion, Sheila was not arrested. Yet. Investigators hesitated, and with no further evidence surfacing, the case went cold. The police continued to look into Bargain Motors, and after spending around 5 hours combing through records, investigators uncovered widespread fraud within Michael's business. And so, he was charged with racketeering, insurance fraud, and vehicle tampering. Ultimately, Michael was convicted on 43 counts of fraud. He was sent to prison and served from 1994 to 1997. He was never charged in connection with Marlene's murder. Michael and Sheila went their separate ways. The police were so close yet so far, and the stress and lack of justice led Marlene's son Joseph into a life of despair and addiction. All of the wealth accumulated by Michael and Marlene was predominantly in Marlene's name. As she died before Michael, 100% of the proceedings went straight to him, with no money passed to her son to support him. Several years would pass, and shockingly, unbeknownst to the authorities, Sheila and Michael rekindled their love, and in 2002, the couple got married. With the substantial wealth carried over from the previous marriage, Michael and Sheila moved to Tennessee. They bought a house and opened a restaurant called the Purple Cow. Throughout this time, Sheila went by the name Debbie, claiming that it was a nickname given to her by her father. The restaurant was successful enough that Michael and Sheila could afford to buy a luxurious lakefront getaway home in Virginia. This property was worth well over $500,000. The couple were not just getting on with their lives, they were living to a high standard. However, their past crept up from time to time. Interviews show that some of Sheila's new friends at the lakefront property recall her drunkenly mentioning that she had gotten away with murder. What's more, rumours flew around the Purple Cow of the very same thing. She was described as cruel, awful, and a mean boss according to a number of employees. And, to add insult to injury, one Halloween, Sheila dressed up as a clown. Even in a world where she was proven entirely innocent, dressing up in the same costume worn by your husband's ex-wife's killer is an act of appalling taste. Despite the rumours and the circumstantial evidence suggesting it was Sheila, the case was still cold, and the police had no idea about the lives Michael and Sheila were leading. That was until 2013. In 2013, a team of cold case detectives decided to review the case in light of dramatic advances in DNA technology. They tested the brown hair in the getaway car with Sheila's, and the results were conclusively showing a statistically significant match. This crucial piece of evidence was a breakthrough and led to her arrest in September of 2017. Initially, the prosecution was seeking the death penalty for first-degree murder. However, before going to trial, there were several twists and turns. The defense in Sheila's case centered on several key arguments. They focused on the mishandling of evidence and alternative suspects. The defense highlighted the disappearance of what is known as the clown sighting file, which contained tips from people claiming to have seen clowns in the area around the time of the murder. The file was missing for years, but resurfaced in October of 2022, just before the trial. The defense argued that this file opened up new avenues for potential suspects. However, by the time it was found, 32 years after the murder, tracking down these witnesses had become impossible. This delay prevented the defense from thoroughly investigating these leads, with many suspects already dead. The defense argued that crucial pieces of forensic evidence, which allegedly linked Sheila to the crime, had been poorly stored, mishandled, and therefore were unreliable. The improper storage of evidence over the decades, including the opening of evidence bags, led the defense to claim that the evidence was contaminated and should be inadmissible. These issues raised serious doubts about the strength of the case. The defense argued that poor investigation, contamination, and long delays made the prosecution's evidence inadmissible and unreliable, leading to reasonable doubt about Sheila's involvement in the murder. As a result, the prosecutors understood that the case might not be strong enough to win, and a plea deal may be required to ensure justice was served. Marlene's son Joseph wanted the truth. He wanted Sheila to admit her wrongdoing, no matter how much time this would reduce her punishment. Joseph had made a promise to his mother, a promise which he intended on keeping. And soon, a plea deal was reached. 33 years after Marlene's murder, Sheila pleaded guilty to second-degree murder on the 25th of April 2023. She was sentenced to 12 years. This was seen as a win for the defense, as they knew that this meant that Sheila could return to her luxurious home in a matter of months. She had already served 6 years throughout the years of hearings before the trial even began, and it was reported that she had shown good behaviour throughout this time. Back in the 90s, the justice system was more lenient, with rules which could reduce sentences substantially for good behaviour. Therefore, even the remaining 6 years could be dramatically reduced. With that said, Joseph still saw this as a victory. However, before he could wash his hands with Sheila and Michael, Joseph said one last thing to the judge. He said, "The only thing I want to say, all through this trial, I didn't see any remorse." He then added, "God be with her." The most up-to-date reports suggest the killer clown Sheila Warren will be released from prison in 2025.